It's words, but they don't mean anything. Like, I don't even know how to respond. This isn't a political message. This is noise coming from his pie hole. There's nothing to analyze. Hello, and welcome to On Message, the show where we analyze the messages campaigns are using to drive the political conversation and try not to rip our hair out in the process. I'm B. Nelson from the Campaign Dispatch, and today we're going to be taking a look at one of the new lines of attack Democrats have begun to deploy in the 2024 presidential campaign. The attack is pretty straightforward. It's basically just that MAGA politicians are, well, weird. Now, my biggest fans will know that I wrote a Substack piece about this before it became a whole news cycle, but the piece that I wrote was sort of more about J.D. Vance and the sort of weird, dark incel corners of the Republican political establishment, and less about the sort of like stylistic weirdness, which is kind of the thrust of some of the political messaging we're going to be taking a look at today. So without further ado, let's jump right in. I have quite a bit of primary source material here. We have some videos, some clips from news shows. We have a few press releases, a few tweets. It's going to be great, and we are going to analyze all of it. So the first clip I want to show all of you and react to is a clip from The View. I wanted to start with this clip because I think it really expertly outlines basically just the main points of the MAGA is weird message. Let's take a look.
Think about it. People on the right say a lot of weird things. When you think of like monitoring girls' periods, that's weird.
That's weird.
Banning books. Coming for drag shows. Trump is kind of the weirdest of them all. Like commenting on his daughter's looks and her sexual is weird. Having 24-karat gold apartment and your name in gold, and
there's
it's
something
weird.
wrong with that.
And burying your ex-wife on your golf course.
It's very weird.
It's
a very weird
So that's
thing.
why that is effective. Is there's so much weird on the other side that pretty much sums it up.
Well, that doesn't
Okay. So now you basically get the idea. And the reason I showed this is because it outlines basically two sides of this coin. One is the policy proposals, banning drag shows, monitoring girls' periods, like all this weird like stuff that could actually turn into really disastrous and scary policy, but also like the weird aspects of Trump and these politicians and just like how stylistically weird they are. So now we're going to move into some of the actual messaging that's being driven by prominent Democrats. The first video I have is of Governor Tim Walz on Morning Joe on July 23rd. And Tim Walz has been sort of driving this message about Republicans being weird for some time now. We know that he was on the Veep shortlist, and so his appearance on Morning Joe and the use of this message got a lot of attention, and it has fueled a big news cycle about MAGA being weird. So this is like, I'm not saying that this is like the beginning of MAGA being weird at all. As I said, I wrote a Substack piece about this like a few weeks ago, but this was the beginning of this news cycle of the MAGA is weird. Let's take a look.
We do not like what has happened where we can't even go to Thanksgiving dinner with our uncle because you end up in some weird fight that is unnecessary. and I think bringing back people together, well, it's true. These guys are just weird. And it's, you know, they're running for He-Man Women Haters Club or something. That's what they go at. That's not what people are interested in. That angst that J.D. Vance talks about in Hillbilly Elegy, none of my hillbilly cousins went to Yale, and none of them went on to be venture capitalists or whatever.
Okay, and then here is Tim Walz later that night on Alex Wagner Tonight, driving sort of the same message.
These are weird people on the other side. They want to take books away. They want to be in your exam room. That's what it comes down to. And don't, get sugarcoating this. These are weird ideas. Listen to them speak. Listen to how they talk about things. Listen to how your previous guests were right. Like you said, they've told them that they shouldn't talk about race. They can't help it. It is built into their DNA because there is no plan. There's no health care plan. There's no health care plan. There's nothing to do on this. They want to take away our alliances and leave Russia to do whatever they want. Look, they are bad on foreign policy. They are bad on the environment. They certainly have no health care plan. And they keep talking about the middle class that, as I said, a robber baron real estate guy and a venture capitalist trying to tell us they understand who we are. They don't know who we are.
What I like about this message is that it actually gets at the why, the so what, right? We've heard up until this point, like a little bit of this message about MAGA being weird as sort of a just like, hey, has anyone noticed this? Like, these guys are kind of weird. But what I like about the way that Tim Walz drives this message is he sort of gets at the why and why it matters if they're weird. Because, and Republicans in fighting back to this news cycle have said stuff like, you're calling us weird while people can't afford their groceries, as if Republicans care about that, right? But setting that aside, it's important to highlight why it matters that they're weird. And it's important to highlight how that ties into the broader message that the campaign is trying to push, right? Here, I think it's a little helpful to just like outline what both campaigns are making their sort of broad strokes message, which is like the umbrella under which all their other messaging goes. So for the Kamala Harris campaign, their big overarching message is future versus the past. And their sort of sub-points under that are a future with freedom to do X, Y, and Z. You can go watch her stump speech. She just like really cleanly and clearly lays out all the points of her campaign, versus the past and Donald Trump trying to roll back the clock on hard-fought, hard-won rights and freedoms and control people. Now, the Donald Trump campaign's overarching message is a little different, and it's presently under construction because the message they were driving when they were running against Joe Biden and the message that permeated everything at the RNC was strength versus weakness. And this is a moment where America is in chaos and we need strength, not weakness. Joe Biden is weak, Donald Trump is strong. That's the message that they were trying to drive. They have to tweak it a little bit now that they're running against Kamala Harris. But my guess is that it'll stay largely the same, that they'll try and play into that subliminally by suggesting that because Kamala Harris is a woman, she is not as strong as Donald Trump. So anyway, if we look at the sort of strength versus weakness framing versus the future of freedom versus past of control framing, the reference to the He-Man Women Haters Club undermines their ability to say, oh, we're strong, or, oh, we're, about masculinity. A lot of this sort of weird messaging that has turned off a lot of women voters is actually not aimed at women voters. That's what I think some of the commentary has got wrong. The Trump campaign is actually now running a campaign where they believe that their path to victory runs through undecided, politically disaffected young men. And they think that getting people riled up by saying incendiary things about gender politics can court men to their side. Whether that calculus is correct remains to be seen, but it is their calculus nonetheless. So what I think is good about the He-Man Women Haters Club and that they're just weird is that it sort of undermines this idea that what they're doing is out of strength or out of machismo. The other thing that I like that he's able to sort of nip in the bud with that message is that he contrasts, and Pete Buttigieg did this in his interview with Lulu Garcia Navarro at the New York Times, is the difference between what Republicans want and what is good for us as a country. And Tim Walz drives this message too, right? They have no healthcare plan. They have no plan for the middle class. They're not from here. Donald Trump is a robber baron and J.D. Vance is a venture capitalist and stuff like that. So that they're frauds. I think those are important messages, important ways to go on the attack. That's why I really love Tim Walz as a messenger on this. I have a few critiques. I feel like we could use some better examples than, they're not good on foreign policy. I think barely any voters actually vote on issues of foreign policy, but that's sort of an ancillary point. It's no one walked away from that, watching that, being like, oh, because he said foreign policy, I don't care. But I think there are more effective examples to use. Also, in the first clip, again, I liked the reference to He-Man Women Haters Club, but there were barely any examples, right? There was a discussion of, having a weird fight with your uncle at Thanksgiving, which I think is something most Americans can resonate with. But there was something left to be desired in terms of the claim evidence reasoning structure, to the extent that that's even relevant. I think I would have liked that, but that's pretty nitpicky. I think, as we'll see, because I have a lot of Tim Walz clips in here, he is one of the more effective messengers on this front. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at some press releases that the Harris campaign put out in the last few days. And to start, I just have this little clip, which is what the first press release here is actually responding to.
Look, here's a situation. Let's say Roe versus Wade is overruled. Ohio bans abortion. And then, every day, George Soros sends a 747 to Columbus load up disproportionately Black women to get them to go have abortions in California. And of course, the left will celebrate this as a victory for diversity. And it's like, if that happens, do you need some federal response to prevent it from happening? Because it's really creepy. And, I'm pretty sympathetic to that, actually.
This is insane. Aside from what J.D. Vance said, which is incredibly damning, which is there has to be some sort of federal response to block George Soros from flying a 747 full of Black women out to California to get an abortion. What are you talking about? It's insane. So here's what the Kamala Harris campaign said in response. This is a statement from Kamala Harris's spokeswoman, Serafina Chitika. I'm sorry if I mispronounce that. But here is the press release. J.D. Vance is a creep who wants to ban abortion nationwide. J.D. Vance is weird. Voters know it. Vance is the most unpopular VP pick in decades. This week, we're all finding out just how creepy J.D. Vance and his Project 2025 plans are. In newly unearthed audio, Vance calls for a, quote, federal response, unquote, to block women in red states from traveling to another state to get an abortion in the grossest possible way. Then she quotes him talking about 747s and George Soros. J.D. Vance made these comments on a podcast hosted by a Twitter user he follows who called for putting misogynist back in the Oval Office and said that we need to stop normalizing consent. Wow. Vance's comments follow reporting earlier this month that described Trump's VP pick as a, quote, menstrual surveillance hawk, unquote, after Vance was one of only a handful of extreme far-right GOP lawmakers to fight for state law enforcement agencies to have the right to track women's menstrual cycles. All this evidence begs the question, why is J.D. Vance so obsessed with tracking women's personal healthcare decisions? J.D. Vance's obsession with controlling women's most personal healthcare decisions isn't just bad policy, it's creepy, it's unacceptable, and voters won't stand for it. Women have had enough of the Trump-Vance Project 2025 ticket, threatening to block access to critical healthcare, and they're going to shut it down by sending Vice President Harris to the White House. Okay. So there's a lot to unpack here. What they're trying to do is just amplify the statement that J.D. Vance made because the statement does so much of the heavy lifting. For me, I think the marriage between the message that their threat to women's bodily autonomy and they're creepy and weird isn't all the way there. To me, like in the statement, it feels like the creepy and weird is like an afterthought, which maybe that's like intentional. And they really just wanted to highlight the unpopular policy position, which is banning abortion. And they wanted to sort of like re-up this message to keep it in the news cycle. But yeah, it feels like there are better ways, like the He-Man Woman Haters Club, right? There are better ways to sort of tie in together the fact that it's both a threat and really weird and creepy in a way that adequately undermines the sort of strength versus weakness message that the Trump campaign is trying to push. At the moment, I feel like that the negotiation between those two positions is a little underdeveloped. But, again, it's sort of nitpicky because the real damning quality of this is that J.D. Vance calls for a national abortion ban and does it in, like they said, the grossest way possible. All right. Here is the next press release we're going to look at. This is from Harris for President spokesman James Singer, and he released this after Trump's remarks at TPUSA, the Turning Point USA conference. Statement on Trump's strange speech at Turning Point USA. Tonight, Donald Trump couldn't pronounce words, insulted the faith of Jewish and Catholic Americans, lied about the election again, lied about other stuff, bragged about repealing Roe, proposed cutting billions in education funding, announced he would appoint more extremist judges, revealed he planned to fill a second Trump term with more criminals like himself, attacked lawful voting, went on and on and on, and generally sounded like someone you wouldn't want to sit near at a restaurant, let alone be the President of the United States. America can do better than the bitter, bizarre, and backward-looking delusions of criminal Donald Trump. Vice President Kamala Harris offers a vision for America's future focused on freedom, opportunity, and security. So what I like about this is that it's a little funnier, right? It's a little less dark. And obviously, I think a lot of that has to do with the source material that he's working with, as opposed to the last statement we looked at. I don't have a lot of critiques for this. It's clear what they're trying to do. I feel like, again, the ability to sort of negotiate the difference between the dangerous, scary, authoritarian policies and the just like insane weirdos who are espousing them is negotiated a little better in this one, where the campaign is trying to attack the policies from the standpoint of just like, look how deranged and crazy this guy is. I like the sort of framing of Donald Trump as this like deranged old man who like you wouldn't want to sit next to at a restaurant, whereas the other one is JD Vance has this vision, and he's here's how I would describe the difference. JD Vance is a sociopath. Donald Trump is psychotic. Maybe that's how I would say it. And Donald Trump is just like unhinged. He's like a guy having a public meltdown at a restaurant. I like that framing, and I think it also just like it feeds more into the age issue a little bit. That's sort of like subtextual here, is like he's just this like rambling, deranged, crazy old man, and I like that, especially because the Trump campaign spent so much time and energy and resources making the issue of age central to the campaign. They are now in deep because they have the old guy. So I think capitalizing on that for the time being, while the Trump campaign is still sort of trying to figure out how they want to attack Kamala Harris, is really smart. All right, next we're going to take a look at Governor Tim Walz once again. This is him with Jake Tapper on CNN's State of the Union on July 28th.
So you've gotten some attention this week for calling Trump and Vance and Republicans in general weird. And I think that you're the one that set this tone, and there's this shift. The Harris campaign seems to be following your lead, echoing this language. Why do you think weird is a more effective attack line against Trump than what Democrats have been done previously, which is argue that he's an existential threat to democracy?
Yeah, and it's an observation on this, and being a school teacher, I see a lot of things. But my point on this is people kept talking about, look, Donald Trump is going to put women's lives at risk. That's 100% true. Donald Trump is potentially going to end constitutional liberties that we have, end voting. I do believe all those things are a real possibility, but it gives him way too much power. Listen to the guy. He's talking about Hannibal Lecter and shocking sharks and just whatever crazy thing pops into his mind. And I thought we just give him way too much credit. And I think one of the things is when you just ratchet down some of the the scariness or whatever and just name it what it is. I got to tell you, Jake, my observation on this is, have you ever seen the guy laugh? That seems very weird to me, that an adult can go through 6.5 years of being in the public eye. If he has laughed, it's at someone, not with someone. That is weird behavior. And I don't think you call it anything else. It is simply what we're observing.
Okay, I like the examples better. And this is, I think, maybe a pattern is emerging here about the difference between Donald Trump and the other sort of MAGA weirdos and how they paint them. One, they paint them as weird and creepy, but like of sound mind, and that makes it weirder and creepier and scarier. And the other one is Donald Trump is just like unhinged and deranged and weird. If that's the framing about Donald Trump, then there's an opportunity that was not seized in this moment with Tim Walz to say, look, he is a threat because he's crazy and weird and a rambling guy. As opposed to, I feel like it's almost like reading the stage directions a little bit to say, we gotta like bring down the scary, or we gotta like not give him so much power. That's the goal, but there are more effective ways to make that the message. Like saying he's crazy and weird, ergo he can't be near the levers of power because he will screw our nation up. I love the examples of the sharks and batteries and Hannibal Lecter. Like, that's excellent. It's excellent. Like, those are some of the weirdest things Donald Trump does. It's perfect. And you know that it gets under Donald Trump's skin. You know he sees this stuff and he's like, he's like, this is Democrats going on offense. This is Democrats taking the fight to Donald Trump, provoking him, jabbing him, trying to get him to respond. And so far, either implicitly or explicitly, as we'll see in a second, they've been successful at that. But I like this. Donald Trump has been in the public eye for so long. There have been so many attacks used on him that being creative and thinking up new ways of attacking Trump is one of the best ways to keep, negative news cycles about him in the spotlight. Okay, next we have a clip from July 26th of Senator Brian Schatz of Hawaii and Chris Murphy of Connecticut broing out on a couch talking about JD Vance.
Hey, Brian Schatz from Hawaii here.
Chris Murphy from Connecticut. This is not our living room, but we're using this fake living room to talk to you about a Super weird idea from J.D. Vance.
Yeah, it's not, I mean, it's quite weird, but it's also offensive. J.D. Vance actually said that people with children should be assigned more votes than people without children. And that if you have a kid, you get like an extra vote, but then you get to control that vote until they turn 18. It's weird, and it's I don't know what to say. It's just bananas.
But you have to take it seriously because it stands in context, right? Republicans are continuing to insist that government should tell you how to live your life.
Yeah, they mean this. They really do. Blake Masters this morning just said, yeah, I agree with that. If you don't have children, if you've lost children, if you're unable to conceive children, if you're 18 and you have not yet started a family, they are saying your vote will count less. It's mean.
It's sort of unbelievable how judgmental the Republican Party has become. Republicans have just decided that they're going to tell you how to run your life. They're going to tell women when they can have children. They're going to tell you if you have children or if you don't have children, how much your vote matters. The sort of dictates from Republicans to people in their personal lives is just pretty unreal.
Take it seriously and fight back.
I like this because this is among one of the weirdest ideas that Republicans have floated for a potential policy. This is one of the most offensive, actually, things that J.D. Vance has said, and that is one of the most politically damning things that has come out about him, is this idea that people who have kids should have more voting power. That's insane. This shit is so crazy that Republicans have actually been calling it out and saying, what the f***? How this like common sense thing that you don't need to have children to be a decent human being who's invested in the political future of this country. This is incredibly politically damning. And what I liked about what Brian Schatz noted was that if you've lost a kid, if you had trouble conceiving, if you miscarried, if you know someone in your family who had those things, if you're a young person and you, like me, who's part of the voting public but has not gotten around to shacking up and having kids yet, this is insulting. And especially for the people who have struggled with fertility issues, who have miscarried, who have lost children, they will never forget this. They will carry this with them and remember it as fundamentally insulting. You know, I liked how they noted how it's so judgmental. It's aimed at control. And it's just f***ing crazy. It's crazy. I did have a few issues. One was the invocation of Blake Masters, saying, like, as a proof point for the fact that Republicans are serious about this, Brian Schatz talks about, like, oh yeah, Blake Masters said, I support this. No one knows who Blake Masters is. No one knows who Blake Masters is. And even if they did, it's like, okay, sorry, actually, the day I'm filming this, last night, Blake Masters lost a Republican primary in Arizona. So this failed Senate candidate from 2.5 years ago, he is not a power broker in the Republican Party. Like, I'm sorry. One of the things that polling has revealed about Republicans is that people take them at their word and take them a lot more seriously since Dobbs. Since Dobbs, voters are much more willing to say, if Republicans are telling us what they're going to do, they're going to do it. And so they're much less willing to brush it aside. I think also it plays into the sort of baked in perceptions of people like J.D. Vance, that they're creepy, that they want to control you. And I think the message in and of itself is damning enough. There are also better ways to just prove that Republicans are serious about this. Invoke Project 2025. I thought they needed better examples of how this was an example of Republicans wanting to control people. They had controlling women's bodies. They needed, like, some other stuff. They needed, like, controlling who you love, what kind of books you read. I feel like there were some better ways to sort of fill out that message, given the the sort of strange environment that this was in. And I liked how they sort of joked about it being a fake living room. I thought the couch was also a really subtle taunt at J.D. Vance, but yeah, I love those guys. They're so, like, endearing. And Brian Schatz, Chris Murphy, love you guys. All right, here's the next clip we're going to look at. This is VP hopeful and Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear talking about J.D. Vance's origin story.
But I don't have to tell you how phony he is. You know, when he responded to my first comment standing up for my people, he said it was weird that I attacked, and this is in his words, his, quote, origin story. Batman has an origin story. Fictional characters have an origin story. Real people have childhoods. That's how contrived his story is. So let me be clear. J.D. Vance ain't from Kentucky. He ain't from Appalachia, and he ain't going to be your vice president.
One of the things that I like about this sort of approach to it is, first of all, it ties in the idea that J.D. Vance is a total fraud and a phony. That's the thing that I thought was important about the whole, like, J.D. Vance saying, not just like, I'm a never Trump guy, but like stuff that I don't even think I believe, and I fucking hate Trump. Stuff like, he's America's Hitler. Those are like fighting words. But people highlighted that to say, like, ooh, look at this. Like, he's actually used to be a never Trump guy. What a hypocrite. And this was implicit in all the messaging sort of around that. But I think it's more important to explicitly say this, is the idea that he will do anything to get ahead and to advance his career, which is the subtext, but it needs to be like part of the main text. It needs to be like a little more explicit, I think. And this does a good job of tying that into the weirdness message. When we take a step back, how weird is this? Origin story? It ties in, and he says fictional characters have an origin story. The rest of us had childhoods, you weirdo. This, again, undermines the strength versus weakness framing by saying, what are you talking? Origin story? Who do you think you are? Batman, right? Like, I love that. It brings in an almost like a high school cafeteria dynamic by being like, they think they're these big, strong he-men, but in reality, they're just like nerds who are compensating for their own insecurity, which is a point I made in my Substack. Shameless plug. I think that what this also does is, it's the same thing I was saying about Donald Trump being on the spotlight for so long. There's almost this undercurrent in the message of, aren't we just f***ing tired of all this shit? Isn't it just, and this goes into future versus past, right? Isn't it just time to turn the page on these guys? Like, these guys are weird. That message I really, really like, because it also ties into the sort of future versus past, old versus new. It's an environment where Barack Obama was actually able to really succeed. Like, he did this with like a gas tax when he was running in the Democratic primary. He was attacked for supporting some gas tax or not supporting, like, getting rid of it. And he said basically, look, this is the way old Washington works. They want to do X, Y, and Z, but it's actually not going to solve the problem, right? So the ability to turn those issues on their head. Another good example is the border. If Kamala Harris is the change candidate and like, this is a new generation, we're going to turn the page on this old chapter, she can say all the things she has been saying about the border, which are really good, by the way. And also, like, I'm not going to continue to fail at what politicians have failed at for decades, which is comprehensive immigration reform. So it's a good environment to be in, and it allows for a lot of agility, and it's particularly ripe for this time when people have been saying for the past 3 election cycles, are these really our choices? Is it really Biden and Trump or Clinton and Trump? And now they have something fresh, something new, a member of a new generation who's charismatic, who they're excited about. And using that message, I think, could be incredibly, incredibly effective. All right, so now we're going to take a look at some of the responses that Trumpers have lodged after this news cycle. At 9:01 p.m. on July 28th, J.D. Vance tweeted a video of Kamala Harris introducing herself during the Democratic primary at a town hall event and saying that her pronouns were she, her, and hers. And the caption is, quote, J.D. Vance is weird, unquote. Maybe I would look up some polling on this, but like, I don't think most people think that saying what your pronouns are is weird, especially not compared to all the shit that J.D. Vance was saying about like black women and 747s getting flown out to get abortions. Like, pronouns? Are you kidding me? He's just amplifying the message, right? Because the clip itself isn't that weird, especially in comparison to what he's said. The reality is that he's just tweeting this caption, J.D. Vance is weird, and re-upping the message. So someone pointed out that there's actually a scene in Veep that mirrors this.
Words, Danny Chung, and torture, they don't belong in the same sentence. They don't. Danny Chung, torture? Come on.
Even if it's like, okay, he needs to respond to this because it's getting too big, like he can't just like duck it and pretend it's not, like the risk of just like letting it be and not responding is too big, which I honestly just like if I were advising JD Vance would be, don't respond, don't engage. They will give up eventually. My guess is that he put this out on his personal Twitter, or maybe his staffer did it. But if his staffer did it, the staffer should be fired, because the first mistake was tweeting this out at all and giving more fuel to the fire if JD Vance is weird. Like, why would you do this? Why would you amplify this message? It just feels like political malpractice. Here's another response. Vivek Ramaswamy tweeted the following on July 28th as well. He said, This whole "they're weird" argument from the Democrats is dumb and juvenile. This is a presidential election, not a high school prom queen contest. It's also a tad ironic, coming from the party that preaches diversity and inclusion. Win on policy if you can, but cut the crap, please. Girl, come on. This is the other thing, is this is the fundamental mistake of them trying to respond to the "they're weird" critique, is then you get into a debate about name-calling versus real solutions. And it's like, I don't think Republicans want to have that debate. If there's any baked-in impression about Donald Trump, it's that he's a loudmouth, he calls people names, he doesn't get a lot of stuff done, he's just a clown, right? And that's one of the big vulnerabilities he has with swing voters, is he's just chaos, and all the sort of attacks that he makes are so exhausting that they just want someone who's going to do the job and not be such a lunatic. And so the second that the Republicans start opening up this debate, which they are doing, right? They're opening up a debate, trying to frame an entire, subcurrent of this election as a question of who's, doing name calling and being juvenile versus who has real solutions. You will never win that debate with Donald Trump as your candidate. Are you kidding me? All right, so let's look at what the party boss Donald Trump had to say in response to the weird attack. This is a clip from an interview with Laura Ingraham from July 30th.
I had a nice 7-iron right next to the pin. Biden wouldn't do that. He couldn't hit the ball 15 yards.
I mean, what is this, just plain weird?
Listen,
American families?
The whole thing is a con job. Just plain weird. You know who's plain weird? She's plain weird. She's a weird person. Look at her past. Look at what she does. And look at what she used to say about herself, and I won't get into it, what she used to say and who she was compared to what she said starting in about 2016.
So I'm not even sure that anything was said. I'm not even sure that he said anything. The thrust of the message, near as I could tell, and this is being generous to him, is, number one, I'm not weird, she is. Talk about, name calling, juvenile insults. I know you are, but what am I? What are we? Is this second grade? Hello? I'm not weird, she is. Did you have a chance to talk to a political consultant at all before you went onto this interview? He's old, he's deranged, he has no idea what he's saying. Not a single thing was said. It was just noise. It was just him talking and blabbing. So the first point is, I'm not weird, she is. No evidence, just that's what it is. And then he says, look at her past. Look at how she used to describe herself and now. He doesn't give any examples, he just says that. What? What are you talking about? It's words, but they don't mean anything. I don't even know how to respond. This isn't a political message. This is noise coming from his pie hole. There's nothing to analyze. So yeah. Next, we're going to look once again at Tim Walz. This is him at a rally in Minnesota for Kamala Harris on July 29th.
These guys are just weird. That's who they are. So it isn't much else. Don't give them the power. Look, are they a threat to democracy? Yes. Are they going to take our rights away? Yes. Are they going to put people's lives in danger? Yes. Are they going to endanger the planet by not dealing with climate change? Yes. They're going to do all that. But don't lift these guys up like they're sometimes the heroes. Everybody in this room knows, I know it as a teacher, a bully has no self-confidence. A bully has no strength. They have nothing. The fascists depend on fear. The fascists depend on us going back. But we're not afraid of weird people. We're a little bit creeped out, but we're not afraid.
I tried to show the Tim Walz clips in order because I think they do a really good job of illustrating how the message was progressed and refined over time. This final clip is it might just be my favorite iteration of the Trump is weird message. The way that you marry these sort of seemingly contrasting messages is by saying, they're weird and they want to control you because they're insecure about themselves. And the ability to say, look, I was a high school principal, I was a high school teacher, I know that a bully has no self-confidence. That's possibly the best way that you could get that message across. And he's a perfect messenger for this specific message on account of that. It's a really just an elegant and a clean way of marrying these two seemingly opposite messages. At the same time, it undermines his strength versus weakness argument, proves he's a threat, and doesn't build him up. And that's why I really like this sort of packaging of that message. And I think Tim Walz should get out on TV and push this message in exactly that way. as long as he can. Now we're going to take a look at two quick clips from the White Guys for Harris fundraising call. The first is Tim Walz yet again, and the second is Josh Gad.
Here's the great news. How often in 100 days do you get to change the trajectory of the world? How often in 100 days do you get to do something that's going to impact generations to come? And how often in the world do you make that bastard wake up afterwards and know that a black woman kicked his ass and sent him on the road? And you know that's something that guy's going to have to live with for the rest of his life. So I got to tell all of you, please, please do what you can.
Also, quick observation. They have Kid Rock, Kevin Sorbo, and a dolphin aficionado. And we have the Hulk, Samwise Gamgee, Luke Skywalker, and Mayor Pete just on this Zoom. That's pretty damn cool.
Okay, so this isn't so much the whole like weird message, but I wanted to bring this in because I think using male surrogates for the campaign to push their weird message, I think is really smart, because I think it's a good way of contrasting the strength versus weakness message that the Trump campaign has pushed as an effort to court disaffected young men. I think the calculus, and Susie Wiles has told reporters this, she's one of Donald Trump's co-campaign managers, the calculus the Trump campaign has made is actually kind of extraordinary. They have said that their entire field operation, so people on the ground trying to persuade voters, is going to be geared towards using micro-targeting technology, which is technology that identifies specific groups of people that can be used for fundraising, volunteering, getting out the vote, turnout, persuasion, their targets for X, Y, and Z, this ad, this message, right? Using micro-targeting, not to send people out onto the street to knock on doors and persuade suburban women or suburban men to vote for Republicans, which was their strategy the last time. They're not even competing for the suburban women vote anymore. And I think that's clear from their message, which is a real big mistake if you ask me. They're betting that they can win this election by turning out politically disaffected and disengaged young men to vote for Donald Trump. And the way that they're going to do that is by pushing this strength versus weakness message and all the undercurrents that come of gender politics. And that's why I think having the male surrogates talk about this and say, look, these guys think they're all cool and manly. Really, they're just insecure and they're weird. That is the response to the effort of the Trump campaign to get these young men to vote for them. So I think some of this more like messaging that's specifically geared towards young men and bringing them into the Democratic tent is really smart. That's why I picked out these two clips, because first you have Tim Walz saying, look, we're the winning team. They're a bunch of weak losers and we're going to kick their ass. And Tim Walz gave an interview to Pod Save America on Tuesday. And he was talking about how some of the young men gravitating towards the Republican Party has to do with the idea that people kind of just want to be part of a winning team. Right? And if they can give the idea that the Republicans are losers and Democrats are winners, and we're just going to we're going to make him so butthurt that he got beat by a black woman, like that sort of like manly offense messaging is really smart. And I think it will be attractive to young men. And it's not a surprise that it's the White Guys for Harris Zoom. I think also the idea of who they've got versus who we've got, including the Hulk and like Luke Skywalker, like that's smart as well, and I like that, and it's sort of the same message. Okay, so the last clip we're going to look at is from Won't Pack Down. This is the first ad that has been cut about this MAGA is weird message.
Us MAGA Republicans banned abortion, but that's just the start.
That's just the start. If Trump gets elected, we want the government involved in all aspects of your sex life.
Way more involved.
Way more involved.
When you have sexual intercourse, it should be illegal to use contraception. No pills, no condoms.
Your genitals are reserved for procreation.
If you freeze 12 eggs, you should be required to have 12 babies, or else you're a serial killer. And I'm definitely not a serial killer.
Are you?
My son monitors my porn usage to make sure I'm not self-pleasuring.
Just like Speaker of the House Mike Johnson. That's true, you can look it up.
Don't you think that's normal?
Yeah, I do.
It's normal for your son to do that.
You should have a family member monitor your porn use too.
Because pleasuring yourself is very, very naughty.
I'm voting in November.
I'm voting in November.
We're all voting in November. Are you?
Because what happens in your bedroom is up to me.
Is up to me and my son. Also, mouth stuff is a sin.
First of all, I think this is really just designed to like kind of go viral on Twitter and maybe boost fundraising or things like that. I don't know if they're actually cutting this ad on TV or if it's just digital. I'll start with what I like. It does a good job, again, of marrying the seemingly contradictory ideas of they're a threat to democracy and they're weird by painting them as these sort of like weird, sweaty, creepy guys, who are obsessed with these ideas about like, oh, I don't even want to say it because it's like so gross. Like, but like the ideas about contraception and family and porn and stuff like that, like using that framing both paints them as like weak, insecure weirdos, while at the same time making the threat very real. And I liked the way that at the end they said like, we're voting, are you, right? As sort of like a call to action to get people out to vote. The one issue I did have with this is that, and I don't know actually how real this is, but I think it's important to draw a contrast between Republican voters and Republican politicians and Republican like party bosses and things like that. Because really, like, there are barely any voters who actually think like this, right? The people who think like this are just like an exceedingly small number of sweaty, gross, Christian nationalist weirdos who have blogs or publish fascist magazines and stuff. Like, this is a super weird niche echo chamber of people. And some of them are voters. Most of them are active members in politics and active members of the political conversation. Many of them are actually politicians, people like Mike Johnson and JD Vance. So I think it's important to highlight that, especially if you want to bring people over to your side, which I'm not sure that that's the purpose of this ad. Like I said, like this may be just one of those ads that they make to go viral on social media to raise fundraising or to help, get their message out into the ecosystem. But yeah, that would be one of my critiques, is make it heavier on these guys are weird MAGA politicians. So thanks for watching or listening. Tune in again soon for another episode of On Message. In the meantime, you can check out my Substack at campaigndispatch.org. I'll see you next time.